It was late in the afternoon, the sun slowly setting behind the buildings, painting the sky in shades of gold and red. The streets were not too crowded, only a few people walking by, each lost in their own thoughts. Among them was an old black man, moving at his own slow pace. He carried a small grocery bag in one hand, and his other hand rested lightly on a wooden cane. His back was a little bent from age, and his steps were careful, but his face showed calmness. His eyes looked forward as if he had walked this road many times before. To anyone passing by, he seemed like an ordinary old man. Nothing more. As he walked, a group of young men stood at the corner of the street. They were laughing, pushing each other, and looking for trouble. Their voices were loud, their movements restless, the kind of energy that came from boredom and arrogance. When their eyes fell on the old man, a sly smile appeared on their faces. They saw someone slow, someone weak, someone who looked defenseless. To them, it was a chance to entertain themselves. One of the young men nudged the other and said, "Look at him. He can barely walk." Another laughed and added, "Easy target. Let's have some fun." Their laughter carried down the street, but the old man did not turn his head. He kept walking, his pace steady, his face calm, as if their words did not reach him. The thugs moved closer. They walked with swagger, their voices louder now, trying to draw the old man's attention. "Hey, Grandpa," one shouted. "Where are you going so fast? Don't trip over your cane." Another mocked, "Careful, old man. The bag looks heavy. Need help carrying it? We can take it off your hands." Their tone was sharp, cruel, filled with a kind of laughter that wanted to cut deep. The people nearby noticed, but no one stepped in. Some slowed their steps, watching with worried eyes, but they were afraid. Others kept walking, pretending not to see. That is how it often is. Many see, few act. The old man, however, didn't speed up or slow down. He walked the same, with quiet dignity, his grip on the grocery bag steady. The thugs circled around him, blocking his way. One stepped in front of him and leaned close, smirking. "What's in the bag, old man? Bread? Milk? Or maybe something better?" Another came from behind, tapping the old man's cane with his shoe, trying to make him stumble. Their laughter grew louder, sharper, echoing down the street. They wanted him to break, to show fear, to beg, but the old man did none of that. He paused, looked at them with steady eyes, and said nothing. There was no anger on his face, no fear either, only silence. His gaze was calm, almost heavy, as though it carried a weight the young men could not understand. That silence made some of them uneasy for a second, but they quickly covered it with more laughter. "Say something," one thug shouted, shoving his shoulder. "Don't just stand there like a statue. Are you deaf? Or too scared to speak?" Still, the old man did not raise his voice. He shifted slightly, his back straightening, his eyes fixed on the one who pushed him. There was a spark in his gaze, something hidden, something that made the thug take a small step back without realizing why. It was not the look of a weak old man. It was the look of someone who had seen more than they could imagine, but the others did not notice. They were too busy enjoying their little game. Another reached for the grocery bag, trying to snatch it, but the old man's grip was firm. His hand did not shake. He pulled the bag close to his side, his expression still calm. "Leave me be," he said softly, his voice low but steady. The words were simple, not loud, not threatening, but they carried a strange strength. For a moment, there was silence. Even the thugs didn't know why his quiet tone felt heavier than any shout. But pride pushed them forward. "Or what, old man?" One laughed, trying to cover his unease. "What are you going to do if we don't?" The old man's eyes did not leave theirs. He said nothing more. His silence was louder than their taunts, and though they could not understand it yet, That silence was the beginning of their downfall. The street around them grew tense. The few bystanders who had stopped to watch could feel something strange in the air. They did not know why, but it felt like this was no ordinary old man. There was something about the way he stood, the way he looked at the thugs, that hinted at a hidden strength, a past unknown. And yet, the thugs only saw what they wanted to see, an old man, slow and weak, an easy mark. They laughed again, pushing closer, blind to the truth that stood right in front of them. What they didn't know was that, behind those calm eyes lived the memory of war. Behind those steady hands was the training of a soldier. And beneath that quiet voice was a man who had once faced death and survived. But they would not learn that until it was too late. The encounter had only just begun. Asterisk. The young men grew bolder as the old man stood there in silence. To them, his calmness looked like weakness. They mistook his patience for fear. The leader of the group, a tall boy with a chain around his neck, smirked and stepped closer. He slapped the grocery bag in the old man's hand, making it swing back and forth. "What's this?" he sneered. "Dinner for Grandpa. Maybe we should eat it for you." His friends laughed loudly, their voices echoing in the street. One of them shoved the old man lightly on the shoulder, testing him, waiting for him to stumble. But he didn't stumble. His feet stayed firm on the ground. He shifted just slightly, steadying the bag against his side, his eyes never blinking. The laughter grew sharper. "You're too slow," one thug said, walking around him in a circle. "What are you even doing out here at this time? Shouldn't you be in some home for the elderly? Or maybe in a grave already?" The others burst into cruel laughter, the kind that came not from joy, but from the desire to humiliate. A few people across the street stopped and looked, whispering among themselves. Some pulled out their phones to record, hoping to capture the scene. None of them stepped forward. Fear tied their feet. They knew the thugs. They had seen them cause trouble before. No one wanted to get involved. One of the thugs, younger than the rest, but eager to prove himself, reached out and snatched the old man's cane. He waved it in the air like a trophy. "Look at this stick. You can't even walk without it, can you? What will you do now, old man? Fall down on the ground and cry." The old man's face did not change. He looked at the boy holding his cane, his eyes steady, his silence heavier than any words. For a moment, the boy's grin faltered. He felt something strange in that gaze, something sharp, like he was the one being judged. But pride wouldn't let him stop. He twirled the cane in his hand and tossed it carelessly to the side. The leader stepped closer again, his chest puffed out. "Listen here, old man," he said with a mocking grin. "You're in our street. You don't walk here without paying respect. Maybe you should kneel. Maybe you should beg? What do you think, boys?" His friends howled with laughter, clapping and shouting, their voices filling the empty air. The old man did not kneel. He did not beg. He simply said, in a low but steady voice, "Go home. This is not your path." The leader froze for half a second. The tone was not loud, but it carried a strange weight. It was the kind of voice that didn't plead, didn't fear, didn't even argue. It was a command. But the silence that followed only fueled the leader's arrogance. He forced out a laugh. "Did you hear that? He's giving us orders now." The thug stepped closer, surrounding him more tightly. One reached for his grocery bag and yanked it hard, tearing it open. A loaf of bread fell to the ground, rolling onto the street. An apple tumbled after it. The old man's eyes followed the food, then rose slowly back to the thug's face. He did not raise his voice. He did not lash out. But there was something in his stare that made the boy shift. Uncomfortably. The crowd that had gathered whispered louder now. "Someone should stop them," a woman said under her breath. "Why is nobody doing anything?" But nobody moved. They only watched, phones held high, capturing every second. The youngest thug, the one who had taken the cane, decided to push further. He moved behind the old man and gave him a shove in the back, harder this time. The old man stumbled a step forward, but he did not fall. He straightened again, turning his head slowly to look at the boy. His silence was more terrifying than anger. "Scared yet?" The leader mocked, his grin wide. "Come on, say something. Fight back." "Oh wait, you can't, can you? You're nothing but an old man." But the old man finally spoke, his voice low, firm, and strangely calm. "You don't know who I am. You don't know what I've seen." The words made some of the boys pause. There was something in the way he said it, like a shadow passing through his voice, that made their laughter falter for a brief moment. But arrogance drowned it quickly. They brushed it off with another round of cruel laughs, telling themselves he was bluffing. One of them bent down and kicked the fallen loaf of bread into the gutter, laughing as it landed in the dirty water. "There's your dinner, old man," he shouted. "Go fetch it before the rats get it." The old man didn't move. His eyes stayed locked on them, calm but piercing, as if he could see through their bravado, through their noise, through their false courage. The crowd could feel something building, though they didn't know what. The thugs thought they were in control, but the truth was different. The stage was set, the line had been crossed, and the quiet storm within the old man was waiting. What they didn't realize yet was that the man they mocked was not fragile. He was not helpless. He was a veteran, a survivor of war, a man who had walked through fire and returned. Their game had only just begun, and soon it would turn against them in ways they could never imagine. The street grew tense. The laughter of the thugs echoed, but something in the air had shifted. The old man stood quietly in the middle of the circle they had formed around him. His grocery bag was torn, his food scattered on the ground, and his cane lay a few feet away. Yet he did not bend to pick them up. He stood straight now, taller than before, his shoulders squared. His eyes locked on the boys who mocked him. The silence was unnerving. The thugs had expected anger, maybe fear, maybe desperate begging. But they got none of that. Instead, the old man's face carried an expression they could not read: calm, steady, unshaken. It was as if nothing they did touched him. For a moment, the youngest thug, the one who had shoved him, felt something crawl up his spine. It was not fear exactly, but a strange discomfort, like standing too close to a fire you cannot see. He laughed nervously to cover it up and said, "Why are you staring like that, old man? Do you think you scare us? You're just bones and wrinkles." The leader of the group forced a smirk, but even he could sense something different. There was strength hidden in those eyes, not the kind of strength that comes from muscles, but the kind that comes from endurance, from survival. Still, he couldn't back down in front of his friends. He had to keep control. "Come on, say something," he demanded, pushing the old man in the chest. "Or are you mute now? What's with that dead look in your eyes?" The old man took one slow breath and finally spoke. His voice was calm, deep, and carried a weight none of them could explain. "Boys," he said softly, "go home. You don't know what you are waking up." The words fell like stones. No shouting, no threats, just quiet truth. The thugs blinked, unsure why their laughter didn't come as easily this time. A strange chill touched the air, though they didn't admit it. To them, it sounded like the rambling of an old man trying to sound tough. They snickered again, though their laughter was thinner now. Weaker. One of them spat on the ground and said, "What are you even talking about? Waking up what? You think you're some kind of hero." He stepped closer, trying to look brave, but inside, his heart was uneasy. The old man's stillness was more frightening than if he had shouted or fought back. Around them, the bystanders felt it too. They whispered, eyes wide, some holding their phones lower now. The energy was shifting. The old man did not move, but it felt like a storm was gathering around him. Quiet, but dangerous. The leader laughed, though there was a sharpness in his voice now. You're nothing. Just an old fool. You think you scare us because you can glare? Let's see how calm you stay when we break you. He lunged forward, shoving the old man harder this time, enough to make him stagger a step back. The crowd gasped, waiting for him to fall. But he didn't. He planted his foot firmly, regained his balance, and stood straight again, like a tree refusing to bend in the wind. He looked the leader in the eye, his voice steady, almost like a whisper, but strong enough to cut through the noise. I've seen worse than you. I've faced men who didn't come back. You don't frighten me. Those words struck differently. They didn't sound like bravado. They sounded like memory, like truth. A heavy silence fell over the street. For the first time, the thugs weren't sure if this was a game anymore. The youngest one shuffled his feet, whispering to the boy next to him, "Why does he talk like that? It's weird." His friend shrugged, but his own smirk had faded. Something about the old man's tone made them uneasy, like they had picked a fight they didn't understand. The leader snarled to cover his own unease. He grabbed the old man's shirt collar, shaking him roughly. "You're trying to act tough, huh? Let's see how tough you really are." The old man didn't resist. His body moved slightly with the shake, but his gaze stayed locked, cold and calm. His eyes didn't belong to a victim. They belonged to someone who had looked into the face of death before and survived. The leader felt it. Just for a second, his hands trembled. He didn't understand why. This was just an old man, yet his stare carried something heavy, something that made his chest tighten. He pushed the man away with a grunt, pretending it was nothing. The crowd sensed it too. Something was about to happen. The air itself felt tight, charged. Like the sky before a storm. The old man took another breath, his chest rising slowly. His voice steady again. "I told you, you don't know me. You don't know the battles I have fought." The words lingered in the air. The thugs didn't yet realize it, but their game was slipping from their hands. The calm they mistook for weakness was the calm of a warrior. The silence before a storm that would change everything. The storm was coming. Asterisk. The moment finally came when silence could no longer hold back the storm. The thugs, still convinced they had control, closed in tighter around the old man. Their voices grew louder, their insults crueler, but inside, some of them felt uneasy. They didn't understand why their laughter sounded hollow now. Why the air around this old man felt so heavy. The leader, burning with pride, decided he had to break the man's spirit once and for all. He shoved the old man hard, trying to send him to the ground. "Fall already," he barked. "You're just a useless relic. You don't belong here." The old man stumbled, his bag slipping from his hand. A few more apples rolled across the sidewalk. For a heartbeat, the thugs grinned, thinking they had one. But then, something changed. The old man straightened slowly, but this time, not like a fragile elder. His back lifted tall, his shoulders squared, and his eyes sharpened. The weight of his presence filled the street, and for the first time, the laughter of the thugs died completely. His gaze was no longer just commit, was piercing, commanding. The kind of look that could freeze a man in place. When the leader swung his fist toward him, it all happened in a flash. The old man's hand moved faster than anyone could imagine. He caught the boy's wrist mid-swing, twisting it with such precision that the thug cried out in shock, dropping to his knees. Gasps filled the street. Nobody had expected that kind of speed from someone his age. Another thug rushed forward, trying to grab him from behind. The old man shifted his stance, grabbed the boy's arm, and with one swift motion, flipped him onto the pavement. The sound of his body hitting the ground echoed across the street, silencing even the crowd that had gathered. Phones that were recording trembled in people's hands. The youngest thug froze, eyes wide, his bravado gone. "What? What just happened?" he stammered. His hands shook as he took a step back. The old man did not chase them, did not shout. He simply stood taller than before, his movements precise, his breathing steady, his face hard with experience. He had moved like a soldier, quick, sharp, and deadly accurate. The leader, clutching his twisted wrist, glared up at him with wide eyes. Who are you?" he gasped, his voice trembling now. The old man's gaze dropped to him, his voice low and steady, yet heavy with meaning. "I am no one to you," he said softly. "But once, long before you were born, I wore a uniform. I walked through jungles, through fire, through gunfire that never stopped. I fought in a land far away, where brothers fell beside me, where every step could be your last. I am a Vietnam veteran." The words hit like thunder. The crowd, who had been watching with wide eyes, now gasped aloud. Whispers spread quickly. Veteran. A soldier. A man who had survived war. Suddenly, the old man was not just an elder in their street. He was something much greater. The thugs froze. Their bravado shattered, their smirks gone. They looked at him not as prey anymore, but as a storm they had awakened without knowing. He let go of the leader's wrist, and the boy stumbled backward, holding his arm close like a wounded animal. "You think you are strong," the old man continued, his voice calm but sharp. "But strength is not in cruelty. Strength is not in mocking the weak. I've seen real strength. I've seen men give their last breath for each other, men who stood tall in the face of death. You know nothing of strength." The boys looked at him, pale now, unsure of what to do. One bent to help the thug who had been thrown to the ground, his hands trembling. The youngest whispered again, his voice breaking. He's a soldier. He's real." The old man's eyes swept across them, heavy and firm. "You mock what you don't understand," he said. "You think age makes me weak. But I carry battles inside me you cannot imagine. I am still here because I fought for life when others lost theirs. And I will not be broken by children playing at being men." The street was silent now, except for the shallow breathing of the thugs who no longer laughed. The crowd had grown, and now there were murmurs of respect, some people even lowering their phones. What had begun as a cruel game had turned into a lesson that was sinking deep into everyone present. The leader tried to find his voice, but when he met the old man's gaze again, he faltered. His pride was broken. His mouth opened, but no words came out. His friends tugged at his sleeve, pulling him back, whispering that they should leave. The old man bent slowly, not to pick up his cane first, but to gather his fallen groceries. He placed the apples gently back into the torn bag, his hands steady, his movements unhurried, as if nothing had shaken him. When he finally picked up his cane, he stood tall once more. Looking at the boys for the last time, "Respect your elders," he said firmly. "Respect those who came before you, because you never know whose footsteps you are standing in." The thugs said nothing. They stepped back, their bravado drained, their pride shattered. For the first time that day, they felt what real fear was, not of fists or shouts, but of a quiet power they could never match. The shocking truth had been revealed. The old man was not their victim. He was a warrior, a survivor, and a man whose very presence commanded respect. And they would never forget it. The street was silent after the revelation. The thugs, who only moments ago were laughing and mocking, now stood frozen in place. Their faces were pale, their swagger gone. The crowd around them had grown larger, and the whispers were no longer about pity for the old man, they were about awe. Phones that once shook with nervous recording now captured something unforgettable. Respect being earned, not through noise, but through quiet strength. The leader of the group, clutching his sore wrist, looked around, searching for support from his friends. But his friends were no longer smirking. Their eyes darted nervously between the old man and the people watching. Pride had drained out of them like water leaking from a broken bottle. They realized they weren't the hunters anymore. They were the fools. The old man didn't press forward. He didn't raise his voice or chase them away. He stood still, cane in one hand, grocery bag in the other, his figure calm but commanding. That calmness was what shook them most. He didn't need to threaten them. He didn't need to prove anything. His silence had already done more than violence ever could. Finally, the youngest thug, his voice trembling, broke the silence. We didn't know," he whispered, barely loud enough for anyone to hear. He couldn't even look the old man in the eye. His head was lowered, his arrogance gone. The old man's gaze swept across the group, and when he spoke, his words cut deeper than any blow. "You judge by what you see," he said softly, "but you know nothing of the battles others have fought. You think strength is loud, but real strength is quiet. Real strength carries scars you cannot see." The leader opened his mouth to argue, to salvage his pride. But the weight of the old man's eyes crushed his words before they could form. He turned his head slightly, embarrassed, his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. For the first time in a long time, he felt small. Around them, the crowd began to murmur louder, some nodding, some shaking their heads at the thugs in disgust. "Shameful," one man muttered. Picking on an elder, another whispered, and a veteran too. "They don't even know who they're messing with." The words spread through the air, surrounding the thugs like chains. The old man bent slowly, picking up the last apple from the ground. He placed it gently into his bag and stood tall again. His movements were unhurried, but every gesture carried weight. He turned back to the boys, his voice steady. "I fought so men like you could walk free. I buried brothers who were braver than you will ever be. And you dare mock me because of my age? You should be ashamed." The words hit the thugs harder than his quick, sharp moves had. Shame burned on their faces, but fear kept them quiet. Their bodies shifted uneasily, their eyes darting to the ground. They didn't want to meet his gaze again. The leader clenched his fists, but there was no fight left in him. His pride screamed at him to strike back, to take control, but his body wouldn't move. Deep down, he knew if he tried again, he would only humiliate himself further. The old man stepped closer, not with anger, but with authority. He leaned on his cane, but somehow it looked less like a crutch and more like a symbol of discipline. "One day," he said quietly, "you will be old too. And when that day comes, you'll pray for respect. Remember this moment. Remember that you mocked a man who carried the weight of war so you could live free." The youngest thug's eyes watered. He bit his lip and whispered again, "We didn't know." The old man's gaze softened for the first time. He nodded slightly. "And that is your lesson. You never know who you are facing. Every person has a story. Every person carries battles inside them. Learn to respect before life teaches you the hard way." The words sank deep, not just into the thugs, but into everyone watching. The crowd, silent a moment ago, now began to murmur with respect. A few people even clapped softly, not in mockery, but in genuine admiration. The sound made the thugs shrink further into themselves. The leader lowered his head, his jaw tight. He couldn't look at the old man anymore. He turned and muttered to his friends, "Let's go." His voice was thin, broken, stripped of the arrogance it once carried. One by one, the thugs followed, their steps quick, their heads down. They didn't swagger now. They didn't laugh. They walked away in silence, their pride shattered, their fear heavy. The old man did not watch them go with anger. He simply adjusted his grocery bag, straightened his cane, and looked toward home. His eyes, however, held something deeper: pain, memory, dignity. He had not fought them to win. He had only stood firm, and in doing so, reminded them and everyone watching what true strength looked like as he walked away. The whispers in the crowd grew into words of admiration. "That man's a hero," someone said. Another added, "The boys will never forget this." None of us will. Respect had been earned that day, not by shouting, not by revenge, but by calm dignity and the weight of truth. The thugs had come seeking power through cruelty, but they had left with fear and shame. And behind them, the old man walked on, leaving behind a lesson the whole street would carry for a long time. The thugs disappeared down the street, their heads low, their swagger gone. The crowd that had gathered didn't chase after them, didn't call the police, didn't even shout. They didn't need to. Everyone knew that what had just happened would follow those boys forever. It wasn't bruises or broken bones that changed them, it was shame. And shame lasts longer. The old man stood for a moment, watching them vanish around the corner. He sighed softly, then turned back to his scattered groceries. His cane tapped gently on the ground as he bent to lift what little food had survived their rough hands. A loaf of bread was damp from the gutter water, a few apples bruised, but he gathered them carefully anyway. To him, food was never something to waste. The people nearby finally moved closer. A woman picked up one of the apples and placed it into his bag. "Sir," she said gently, "I'm so sorry you had to go through that." The old man shook his head. "Don't be sorry for me," he replied quietly. "Be sorry for them. They don't know what respect means yet. Life will teach them." His words carried no anger, only a heavy sadness. It was not the sadness of a victim, but of someone who had seen too much of human cruelty before. A young man from the crowd, who had been recording everything, lowered his phone and asked, "Were you really in Vietnam?" The old man looked at him, eyes distant as though he was staring at something far away. "Yes," he said simply. "I was there. I lost friends there. Boys not much older than those thugs. Brave boys. Good boys. Some never came back. And those who did, we carried the war home with us even when people stopped talking about it." The crowd grew quiet again. His words cut deeper than the scuffle had. Suddenly, he was no longer just an elder who had defended himself. He was a living reminder of sacrifice, of history, of battles most people only read about. One man stepped forward, his voice filled with respect. "Thank you for your service, sir." The old man gave a small nod, his expression unreadable. "I didn't do it for thanks," he said. "I did it because it had to be done." He turned and began walking again, his pace slow but steady. The crowd parted naturally, giving him space, their eyes following him with a new kind of respect. No one saw weakness in his bent back anymore. No one saw fragility in his steps. They saw strength, quiet, unshakable strength, as he disappeared down the street. Whispers filled the air. "He's a hero. Did you see how he moved?" Those kids didn't stand a chance. But beyond the excitement, something more powerful settled in everyone's heart. A lesson. The lesson that age does not erase dignity. That quiet people may carry storms inside them. That respect is not something you give only to those who look strong. It is something you owe to every person. Because you never know their story. The thugs would remember that night for the rest of their lives. Their pride had been broken, yes, but perhaps that break was what they needed. Perhaps, one day, they would look back and realize that the old man had done them a favor. He had given them a lesson no teacher, no parent, no lecture could give. And the community, too, carried that lesson. Parents went home and told their children what they had seen. Videos spread online, and people commented not about the fight, but about the dignity of the man who had faced cruelty without losing control. That old black man became more than just a passerby in their street. He became a symbol of the truth that strength is not in fists or loud voices, but in calm, courage, and a life lived with honor.